Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm speaking to a communications expert who's also a comedian. Neil Mullarkey is the co-founder, along with Austin Powers star Mike Myers, of the world-famous improvisation group, the Comedy Store Players. Comedy fans will recognise him from shows like Have I Got News for You, Whose Line Is It Anyway, Saturday Live and QI. And Neil is the author of a brand new book called In the Moment that highlights techniques we can all use to build our confidence, communication and creativity in places like meetings, presentations and conversations. In other words, to be more human. In our discussion, you'll hear about Neil's story, how he came to work in improv, the balancing act between having structure, rules, processes and methodologies in place, but also free rein to unleash creativity. This, for me, is fascinating from a human risk perspective, because on the one hand, if we just give people free rein to be creative, they will do things that we don't necessarily want, but they'll also produce some amazing results. We tend only to get progress when we have allowed human creativity to be let loose. So how do we balance this idea of letting people be human with the rules, processes and controls that we need in place to stop bad things from happening? Well, Neil has some of the answers, and unsurprisingly, he's incredibly entertaining and has some really interesting stories and insights to share. Before we begin, let me remind you that when you're buying Neil's book, In the Moment, you can also pick up a copy of mine. Humanizing Rules, Bringing Behavioral Science to Ethics and Compliance is available now, and you'll find a link in the show notes to be able to read the first few chapters for free. With that said, I know that you are going to thoroughly enjoy this because I thoroughly enjoyed recording this. Here's my guest, Neil Mullarkey, on being in the moment. Neil, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Hello, I'm Neil Mullarkey of the Comedy Store Players and author of the book In the Moment with Christian Hunt. Very exciting, talking about risk and more.
Wow, that is probably the best ever response to that. I'd expect nothing less, of course. And to start us off, Neil, can we talk about how did you get into improv and comedy? Because I know that you'd studied scientific subjects, which my basic brain tells me is quite an interesting move from one to the other.
Well, I'm going to disrupt your preconceptions. First of all, I did maths, physics, chemistry, A-level. Then I did economics for 1 year and then social and political science. And indeed, one of my essays for social science was, is social science a science? And then we get into what is a science? And I talked about falsifiability and Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper. And these are all things that your listeners are very excited to hear about, I have no doubt. But I do remember some people saying that when you write comedy, it's a bit like maths, it's a bit like music, all of which have structure and form, and sometimes there's disruption of that. So yeah, when I chose maths, physics, chemistry, A-levels, I wanted to be a doctor. I thought that's good. I was a bit kind of do-gooder. And then I was in the school play and I was lured by show business and laughs. I could get laughs and it was really good. I liked it. I know I could get them off stage, kind of. I wasn't the funny one in my family. My brother was, and he became an accountant. And then I realized I could do it professionally. And then I didn't tell my parents, but I got into the footlights because that's what I wanted to do. Ultimately, having been in the play. And interestingly, now I teach people improv and also other theatre and skills using some of my social science. And so in a way, I'm a doctor. Again, I'm helping the world and helping people through their communication skills. So I'm hoping that I've come somehow through full circle. But I found I wasn't that enamored of organic, inorganic chemistry. Didn't want to do it thereafter. Maths, I did like physics when it got a bit crazy with quantum and do you know what you're doing? Who are we? Uncertainty. You can know one thing, but not the other. If you know this too well, you don't know that stuff, which was all great and which accorded to my view of humanity, I guess. And I saw a guy called Desmond Morris, who talked about man watching, the zoologist looking at people, about body language and stuff. I thought that's fun. So social science was my thing. But then to be present at the Cambridge Footlights, when I was that, I told my parents, my dad was a chemical engineer. My mum was a maths teacher. A bit worried about what I'd chosen to do, but my dad had always said, choose what you should want to do as a career rather than to study what gets the job. And so I remember at one stage at 3 a.m. at a ball, we got paid some money, and I was in a group with a man who's now called David Tyler. His name was Dave Meek at that stage. He did theoretical physics. He's now a radio producer, incredibly successful Sony Award winning producer. And at 3 a.m. at this ball, the audience is kind of exhausted. And I'm just riffing with the audience. And I remember him saying, "Get Neil off the mic." And I just loved riffing, not knowing what I was going to say, see how it goes. And I didn't know improv was going to be my thing, to be honest. I thought I was going to be a writer, performer, writing sketches like Footlights people tend to produce, who write really well crafted sketches and so forth, or more. And then we went on tour to Australia, got my equity card, and we were doing our show, ex-Cambridge Footlights, because the other lot, the following year had got the name now. And we were doing the Gate Theatre above the Prince Albert pub in Notting Hill. And there was a man selling tickets for us. He was sitting in a wheelchair, not because he's a wheelchair user, but because we'd used all the regular chairs on stage. We thought it'd be fun for our review to be sitting on stage eating crisps and twiglets and party food while the audience came in. Not realizing, of course, that looked a little bit kind of, we don't care. Anyway, in the early part of the evening, we were doing a show called Feeling the Benefit, which was our attempt to do a Dario Fo-esque play. Now, listeners of this Human at Risk podcast may not know who Dario Fo is, but he did a play called Accidental Death of an Anarchist, which, as we speak in summer 2023, has made its reappearance in the West End. It ran for years in the West End. It was a kind of farce satire on the police state, if you like, or how police behaved in Italy. We thought, let's do that. And we failed dismally. It was called Feeling the Benefit, because all we knew was signing on, because we hadn't got any jobs yet. So we did one set in a benefit office. And Mike Myers was the man in the wheelchair selling tickets for us. And he made me laugh. We got talking and I said, "What are you up to?" He'd come from Second City. And I'd heard of Second City. Most people had not heard of Second City, which is the home of comedy and improv especially. I didn't know it was improv. I knew that a lot of people had come from Second City to Saturday Night Live, and specifically a movie called The Blues Brothers, which I'd watched late night, one night at the Arts Cinema in Cambridge and just loved. I thought, this is what I want to do. So I found out John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Saturday Night Live, before that Second City. So when he'd come from Second City, Canada, I was excited, but I didn't know the improv. So gradually, we started talking. I said, let's go and see some comedy. I took him to Jongleurs comedy, alternative comedy place. He said, let's do a double act. And he made me laugh. And he did that thing where he walks down the stairs behind a couch, except he did it behind a car. I was on the pavement, a parked car. So he sort of made me laugh. And let's do a thing. Let's do it. Mullarkey and Myers, who were. And gradually, Mike was telling me about the concepts of improv, about listening, accepting the offer, endowing somebody with characteristics. So I might say, "Hello, Christian, how are you? Good to see you're out of jail finally," which is a great start to a scene. Instead of, "Hello, who are you? What's going on? Look at that. Isn't it interesting?" So you endow people and you bring forward a backstory, if you like. And so Mike would always say, "Why have the gods of improv brought us to this scene? So make something be at stake, create characters, who, what, and where." So basically, it was Mike Myers' fault. So I'm telling you, it was there in the ether. I quite liked when things went wrong on stage. I quite liked playing with an audience. And then Mike gave me the form, I suppose. And we were getting noticed on the cabaret circuit because mostly it was stand-ups. Mostly it was people who hadn't rehearsed, who might have had another job. We had costume, props, and we were doing sketches of kind of a story and scenes rather than stand-up. And so we're getting noticed because it was quite refreshing. People laughed. This Canadian guy who was incredibly talented. And so we found ourselves playing McNally's, a small theatre in Edinburgh, in 1985, before you were born, Christian, probably all of your listeners. And Kit Hollaback was on the bill with Paul Martin, as he became Paul Merton, and Dave Cohen. Dave Cohen is a writer, horrible histories, now writing novels and so forth, and wrote on I Have I Got News for You. But in 1985, we were not known. And so Kit said, let's do some improv. She'd worked with Robin Williams in San Francisco. "Mike, you've done Second City. You can come. And that guy, your friend Neil, bring him along." So we did it, and we did the Southside Community Centre. Dave Cohen tells this story differently, but I remember there were about 7 people in the audience. By the end, this was 1:30 a.m. By 2 a.m., we were finishing. There were 2 people on stage, Mike and me, and 2 people in the audience. Dave, Kit, and Paul had just run away. But I think we got paid £1.52, whatever the door split was. But then I thought that's the end of that. And then Kit and Dave spoke to the Comedy Store, and we were doing the Comedy Store on a Sunday night. They only do Friday, Saturday stand-up, and we did improv. And so that's basically how it started. Mike was a good improviser. They knew that, and they said, oh, bring him along, your friend. So because Mike inculcated me with this interest, I went to a 2-week workshop with a man called Desmond Jones, who had worked with Keith Johnson and others. But basically, it found me, I dare say. Improv found me. As soon as you've done an improv workshop, I see this every day, when I teach improv, people go, oh, isn't this great? You turn up, you don't have to think of funny, you create scenes, and funny comes along to rescue you. And if you're open to the muse, then joyful things happen. It's not the same as scripted comedy. I admire those people who write scripts and books and film scripts. These are hard crafted endeavors. We turn up and fall about a bit, physically and verbally. And the audience loves it because it's in the moment, because we're sharing our vulnerability. So I did take a left turn, but it's been now the main thoroughfare of my life, performing it still with the Comedy Store players and teaching it now for about a quarter of a century to people in organizations. And when I started, Christian, this is just one question, by the way. I might finish.
Loving it. Keep going. People don't want to listen to me, Neil. Keep going.
I'm quite interested because listeners may not know, but Christian's in an underground bunker somewhere in Germany in sepia tones because he can't open the blinds where he is. He's not saying more than that. I think it's just a cover story. He's maybe been kidnapped, maybe because of his cyber risk thing. He's not allowed out. He has to be fully, degaussed or something. Go through a magnetic Faraday cage or something. Anyway, so improv, I teach to people in business. I thought it was all about the listening thing because I listen to you, you listen to me. I treat what you say as an offer, and that's how we navigate the improv moment. We work together, heading into places we didn't expect, but we go there together. And of course, then I started doing with business schools and others, and there's lots of models about leadership and organizations that have a lot in common with improv, that recognize that organizations are not machines. They're a series of conversations between people who may be colleagues, who may be customers, suppliers, and so forth. And that is never going to be like a machine. There are some elements that might be. Most of our pictures of organizations, orgs, charts, look like machines, look like sausage factories where you press a lever and out comes the sausage at the other end. But in fact, they're just a bunch of people doing a thing, coming in, coming out, people leave, and yet still the organization seems to exist. Even though there's a building, that isn't the organization. That's the answer. So improv found me. Mike Myers was very much the Obi-Wan Kenobi to my Luke Skywalker, dare I say. But I suppose it just immediately felt right to me because I didn't really feel very good at comedy writing. I have written things. I've written one-man shows and I've written sketches and I've written corporate videos. But the improv thing just makes me so happy and fully myself. And seeing others doing it as well, it feels fabulous. Even when they are fearful initially, all I say is listen and go with what the other person gave you, and she's going to do the same. And that magic is addictive.
I've heard you talk about the difference between performing a play, where there's a script that you have to follow, and improv. And conventional logic is improv is terrifying because you don't know what's going to happen. But I've heard you make the point, which I thought was really interesting, was actually improv gives you freedom, whereas everybody knows if you fail to follow the script in a play. And so you talk about that as being much more liberating than being constrained by someone's script, which I thought was interesting because you, on the face of it, when you're not involved in that, in improv, it almost seems the opposite to be true. But the script would give you comfort. But I really like this idea that you were embracing that uncertainty.
Exactly. And actually, most people are improvising most of the time. So the problem comes when you find a situation where you should be scripted, a play, a presentation, an agenda, a budget, whatever, strategy perhaps. And you think, oh, improvise. And then equally try and stick to a script with a moment with a colleague, a client, a friend, when you're just scripting it and sticking to words that you've prepared. And so this continual dynamic. And so I flippantly say, when I'm improvising on stage, I can't get it wrong. I am the script. Whatever I say is the script. On the other hand, I pay tribute to those who do have scripts, who've written scripts, or actors who justify the writer's words. That is a real script, the skill, I should say. Of course, within that, in the rehearsal process, people are improvising in terms of the movement, the tonality, the emphasis of how they play it. And there is a great skill in bringing to life Shakespeare, this script written centuries ago. So there is improv. There are moments of finding novelty. But I also talk about the idea of improv is a form with its own rules about listening. It's not just chaotic spontaneity. It's based on a protocol of listening, working with what the other person says, and generally underneath this trying to create some kind of story. But my most downloaded or read LinkedIn piece was talking about the idea of winging it versus improv. Now, winging, Christian, do you know what winging it came?
I have been known to do it, Neil.
Okay.
Because we think you're going to tell me, I'm guessing, that the origins are not the one I think it is. So winging it is sort of doing a Boris Johnson, one might say, in terms of making it up as you go along.
Well, actually, it's sort of come to mean making it up as you go along and looking like you're on wings. I'm doing my best wing acting, everybody, now. So I'm gliding over the currents. But actually, the derivation came from somebody who was in panic, couldn't think of what to say, couldn't remember the line. There was only one version of the truth. The script had to be played, and she or he couldn't remember it, so went to the wings. What's the line? What's the line? So they were actually in a state of non-creativity. They should have learned something. They were in the wrong game. The audience knows there's a script. There's one version of the truth. In improv, there are multiple versions, dare I say, tending towards infinity. And this is beautifully conveyed in the idea of convergent versus divergent thinking. Convergent thinking is going towards the answer. We find there's one answer and that's that. Divergent is, and improv could be part of this, is you don't even know, is it the right question? The answer may be inhibiting you. And of course, in moments, sometimes you want convergent. The answer is 7. The answer is yes, we do it. Or actually, should we be thinking outside the box? And so winging it is now we feel it's kind of, oh, haven't prepared properly, better make it up as I go along. And that may be fine. But the original definition was somebody in a state of panic because they knew there was a script. And I see this all the time. When I do improv sessions, people can't think of what to say, not because they don't have possibilities in their head. They've got so many. They've got a million things they're trying to, which one's the right one? Which one's best? The improviser goes, the first one that comes to me, based on what I've heard from that person, based on the offer, is the right answer. And so when I did read a philosophy book, we talked about a category mistake, which is basically comparing apples and oranges. Another day, I'll tell you that in reality, we do compare apples and oranges, don't we? Which is, shall I take the taxi or shall I wear a dress? I don't know, to use a quite strange example. Anyway, but the category mistake is it better to be scripted or not scripted? And I say, it depends, the context. So winging it was a state of panic, can't remember the line, and because there's only one version of it. Improv is, there is no script. The audience joins us on a journey of openness. And this is well summarized for me by Woodrow Wilson. Do you know who Woodrow Wilson is, Christian?
He's a US president, unless there's another Woodrow Wilson I'm unaware of.
He's that guy. He's the only one, you'd be surprised to hear, the only US president who had a PhD in political science. And he is quoted as saying, people make the mistake of thinking that government is answerable to Newton rather than to Darwin. Now, what does he mean by that? Newton is laws of motion. 3 laws of motions, basically, those help us build machines. Put some work in here, apply some energy, and out comes some energy there, broadly speaking. F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. And this is a beautiful one, which is to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Imagine if you're doing a change in an organization. Every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Anyway, that's mechanics for you. But for a moment, applying it to human beings is rather fun because actually no organization is entirely Newtonian. It's not without Newtonian elements. On the other hand, Darwin, what he meant by that, Darwin is adaptation, evolution, sometimes not particularly helpful to the body or the ecology it's working in, sometimes survival of the fittest, sometimes survival of the most adaptive, or whatever that means. So what he's saying, government, and I think any human organization, you have to be careful applying Newtonian straight lines to it. Moments of inertia, fulcrum, levers, all these stuff you probably remember from high school maths or physics. And Darwin is actually, why are they pink? Why is the Galapagos Islands got all these creatures that may not be elsewhere? Because of systems reacting to each other and individuals applying some force to a system and then the system applying back to them, just to go into a bit of depth, which I failed to explain with any clarity whatsoever. So I'm saying that we are winging it. You're kind of not scripted. Yes, it's great for me, but I know it's not great for everyone. On the other hand, working with people on presentation skills, they don't want to be scripted. And I say, actually, for a 10-minute presentation, you should know it's going to last 9.5 minutes. You should have some bullet points. You should have rehearsed it. It should be a bit Newtonian in the conversation with a client, a colleague, a loved one, or when you've got a change or a process where there's multiple teams involved. You've got to get their buy-in. You don't know how it's going to work. Actually, they're going to be putting it into practice. You do need some improv where you've got to listen to external forces and you're co-creating the system that then becomes the future. So that's kind of the script versus not script. And any individual, certainly people in leadership, and interesting also in terms of risk, you've got to have some guide rails. You've got to have some processes. And then it seems to me that every single moment there could be an unexpected actor, force, glitch that comes in. And if you are winging it, you might be thinking, I've got to think of the script. But actually, it comes to me now is, for me, if it's tending towards improv, is, that's happened. That is an actual piece of data, whether it's something technical, something in the regulatory environment, what customers do. That's happened. I can't undo it. So how do I make that an opportunity? So improv comes in with how do I spot opportunities if things have changed versus how do I deal with difficulty when things have changed. So improv isn't just cleaning up the mess, winging it with a kind of, I've made a mistake there, I didn't plan properly. It's actually, my plan was sufficiently flexible to adapt to a changing environment. So Eisenhower, military man, then another president, said that planning is vital, but your plan is dead as soon as you hit the enemy. It doesn't mean you don't think about alternative scenarios, but also accepting when your plan does need to be altered in the heat of the moment.
And it strikes me that, as you say, business and endeavors in life succeed because of that balance of we need to know what we're doing and have expertise and plans and structure, but equally we need to have that freedom to think creatively. And if I think about R&D and marketing, the iPhone, great example of something that's been invented that breaks convention. Conventional wisdom equals need a keyboard. Actually, Apple decides we don't. And we look back now and think, well, that was obvious. But at the time, that required a bit of sort of creative thinking outside the traditional mechanisms. So I love this balance of Newtonian and Darwinian, because I think you're right. There are certain things where you wouldn't want to be making it up as you go along. But equally, businesses that don't have that creative spark are not going to survive. And we saw in the pandemic, as a good example, and we can see in other contexts, lots of structures and rules and processes we've put in place aren't necessarily appropriate. And we tend to hold on to structures. We tend to hold on to that Newtonian piece where that doesn't necessarily make sense. So if anything, it seems to me that the Darwinian process is often permitted in business, but in very limited spaces. And possibly there's room for us to think much more broadly about how to apply that and bring that into context that we might not have thought about before.
Exactly. And if I may say so, the pandemic was an interesting one because we quickly made new structures without thinking about it, which weren't necessarily helpful, which is, let's have a meeting. We'll just do it on Teams or Zoom. And we didn't think about things like how tiring that would be. We didn't think about looking at a screen all day and being looked at is not particularly healthy. We didn't think about, well, hang on a minute, how have we thought about the composition of the video the person is watching? So I don't know about you, Christian, but I love looking up somebody's nose and having a big window behind their head so I can't see their face. So things like that, that there was a Darwinian moment of quickly, let's adapt. And then that became Newtonian. Well, that's what we do with meetings, or we don't turn cameras on. Meetings must last an hour or half an hour. And the Darwinianism is saying, well, actually, let's look again at the structures that have come into place. Wing it. There was no script. So we quickly made up a script that then became set in stone. This is what we have to do. How do we, and I remember reading, how do we measure productivity? Oh, well, we see how many emails people have sent. We see how many minutes per day they're online. Is that a measure of productivity? I mean, that kind of incorrect Newtonian activity is what makes me think I've got something to offer to this world. On the other hand, clever, systematic processes like, hang on a minute, why don't we send laptops to these people? One client, they sent laptop things stand you put on your desk so you don't sit down all day. It's very bad for you to sit all day. So the 20-20-20 rule, that's a rule, that's a structure, which is every 20 minutes, look away from your screen for 20 seconds, for somewhere 20 feet away or 20 yards, even better. Great structure. Okay. So every 20 minutes. So that's a structure, an enabling structure. It seemed to be very quickly we created structures that became set in stone, dare I say, digital stone, if I may mix my metaphors. And then they weren't enhancing us. So for me to come and say, well, why don't we stand up in a meeting, in a Teams meeting? Oh, that's fun. Why don't we muck about? Why don't we ask people to go away, get an object to talk about? Why don't we prepare people by saying, bring an object that makes you excited or that summarizes how you feel, or isn't a slide and tells us how strategy may unfold, that kind of stuff. So playing with the form and using chat. So here we are, we had a nice structure, and people don't use chat necessarily. It could be a great way of bringing people in. Another thing, people saying, well, introverts doing rather well on Teams or Zoom because they're in their home, they're in their favorite environment, they're near their dog or whatever, their family, their house, in their favorite pajamas. So they feel enabled to speak up. Again, I don't know. And I think my exhortation in my book, which is called In the Moment, published by Kogan Page, is to say, experiment, find the structures that help, look at the structures that don't, and be aware that any structure that's helping now may be inhibiting in the future. How do we make these things work for human beings? So that's why I like agile. I don't know, Christian, are you an agile person?
I try to be, well, physically not, but mentally, yes.
But there's this agile thing. If people don't know, agile software, which explained to me very simply, again, I love metaphor because it helps us picture something if we explain it in terms of something else, which is in the old days, building houses, architecture, beautiful plan, architect, beautiful, look, it's all measured and stuff. Builder comes along, looks at the plan, tries to build, it doesn't quite work. Goes back to architect. Can we just play with it? Okay, build house, finish. Person arrives, live in house. Oh, these things are doesn't quite work. Snagging. How do I get the mop in that cupboard? So, and the person explained to me, get the person who's going to live in the house and who's going to build the house to talk to the architect while they're drawing up plans, and actually keep the architect involved while the person living in the house, sort of thing. And it explains kind of, instead of saying we'll be 100% perfect in 3 years' time, we'll be 90% okay within 3 months' time, something like that. And it was a manifesto, which is give human primacy rather than rules. Of course, as with all these things, it very quickly, if you're not careful, it becomes a rule. We must be agile. Okay. So we must be agile. Must be agile. And so very quickly, this became a stick with which to beat people. I'm talking about some instances where people say, oh, agile. Yeah. We just had one of those. What it means is saving money. What it means is hot desking. And the manifesto was written, tablets of stone, about process being subordinate to people, all that kind of stuff. And it's okay to make mistakes. All these things are highly humanistic. And according to improv, guess what? Soon it becomes, we must be agile. And it's a way of making your life unpleasant by saying you can't have your own desk, or we save money, or it's taken way longer than it should. Whereas if it's most agile transformations, quick and cheap, because they're being written on the fly sort of thing. They've got an idea of where they should get to. And they say, actually, it's more advantageous to get it out there, get people trying it out rather than saying getting it perfect, because by the time you got it perfect, the original concept may be completely obsolete. So I guess what I'm saying is, let's have human beings involved in this. And as you know, Christian, some human beings love structure and rules and some don't. But even then, and I remind people of the fact when I perform with the Comedy Store Players every Sunday, comedystoreplayers.com in London, we have a structure. The show starts at 7:30. The doors open 6:30. We finish at 9:30. The Comedy Store has organized security, lights, insurance, drinks, food, tickets, so that we can improvise. We've got 6 people who've been booked months in advance. We play generally the same games every show. So there's plenty of structure within which to then improvise. So it's not just we turn up someday somewhere and see, hey man, let's have a happening. So it's this continual thing. And I borrowed this from my chums at Ashridge, a business school, who were, when I first started this, were very engaging. They kind of were welcoming because they were saying this already. And I learned stuff from them about adaptive leadership, bounded instability. There's all sorts of metaphors for leadership is enough, and they call it minimal structure, maximum autonomy. Minimal structure, maximum autonomy. Isn't that great? Basically, enough structure so you don't feel at sea, but sufficient autonomy that you can make your rules and or protocols that allow for the people in the gang to thrive. And of course, a great team like that tends to be in showbiz. You 3 weeks rehearsal, on tour for 3 months or whatever, and you know there's a finite, clear goal. The first night has to be understood. Television sitcoms, Fawlty Towers, John Cleese, brilliant on creativity. We've got a finite period. Yes, they spent ages writing, he and Connie Booth, but then in the rehearsal process, you change things, but you stick with some things. Then it's recorded. You might do 2 recordings or cut and paste or redo. So you had this idea that when it was done, you could go away. Too many jobs, I think you're stuck there for years on end. So projects are all, the research says projects are very productive. Finite time, people controlling their own budget, I don't know, 8 people involved or fewer. That's where people can be efficient and feel proud. We did this together, and here's the end product. So I will always defend people's right to have structure and their right to be spontaneous. And I don't envy anybody who's got a proper job who's got to keep that balance in mind.
And I love your depiction of organizations. And often these things are put on the equivalent of stone tablets where you get, we will be agile, or this is a meritocracy. And they make great pronouncements that if you look at the substance, sounds great, fabulous, right? This is like very human. So they know the right things to say, but often these things are sort of mandated in a way that's very inhumane. And so when we look at balancing structure, it's almost trying to take the bits that need to be fluid and creating rigid structures around that. That is how we will solve the problem. And to your point, that's not how we operate in the real world as real humans. And so I love this idea. Whenever, one of the things I enjoy doing is going to companies and sort of reading the value statement and saying, is this unique to this company, or is this boilerplate nonsense that frankly could be replicated everywhere? Most of the time, you can't really tell one company from the other, and it doesn't mean anything to people, but it sounds good. It's ticked a box. So I think you've beautifully highlighted the fact that often organizations, they try to do, or they at least pretend to try and do this Darwinian thing, but it's imposed from on high, rigid, structured. And that doesn't lead to what you're talking about.
Yes. And frankly, I found it's imposed from on middle. It's the boss, the CEO, the C-suite. They're kind of saying, let's be agile, let's take risks. And there's a structure beneath them that hasn't been empowered to say, let's be a bit disruptive. Now, I feel for those people whose natural training has been to be fairly technical, rigid. And then somebody from on high or below says, can we play with it a bit? And how do I do that? How do I make my week work around play, spontaneity and or improv? But the joy of this for me is 3 examples I'll give you. If I can remember all 3, that'll be great. The other day, somebody emailed me saying, can you do some funny improv sketches about the company's values? I said, okay, send them to me, thinking there'd be 4 fairly good ones: integrity, collaboration, one team. and there were 17. And kind of, they were boilerplate words, but then incredibly long, boring Excel spreadsheety, LinkedIn-y nonsense, task-oriented, verbiage. And I said, we can't improvise values. Well, the best thing you do is when somebody's not collaborative, we do a sketch when somebody's not being collaborative. When somebody's not customer focused, we'll do a funny sketch. It's customer. Would you mind? Go away. I've got things to do. Yeah. Okay. Do you mind? I've got my script to read. Stop interrupting me, customer. And then I find that, for example, organizations saying we've got a new strategy. What's that? We're going to be customer centric. What is that? What the hell are you being if you're not customer? What are you? Are you CEO centric? And then, oh no, we're sort of, what's the word? Device centric or software centric or some other process centric, it's this revelation where the customer who buys your stuff should be listened to. One of the other two, and I may remember the third, Donald Sull, Sull, quite hard to picture. He was a professor at a London Business School, not far from where I live. We used to hang around Regent's Park. And I remember him saying the first time I met, he said, Neil, I think improv is the answer. I'm still not quite sure what the question is. And so my book, In the Moment, is kind of a challenge to myself to try and answer that question. And there are times when improv is the answer and when something else is the answer. Anyway, I remember him, and I did a session for his MBA class once, and he talked about mission statements versus vision. And he said, be careful of your mission statement. Make it nice and woolly, make it a vision. We want to be the best of the best or something. Because a really good mission statement, for example, might be, we want to be the world's leading manufacturer of fax machines. What's wrong with that? Wouldn't that be great? But you can imagine, do you remember a time? I remember seeing a fax machine, an advert on telly. There was somebody put a bit of paper in a machine in London, and out it came in Japan. I thought, that's fantastic. Eventually became cheap enough. I got one at home. I loved my fax machine. I could receive documents from somebody a long way away and they come. That's so exciting. And so, of course, why wouldn't you want to be the leading manufacturer of fax machines? So let's build lots of fax machine factories. Now, of course, who knew that would soon be foolish? So that's why Donald Sull, Don, would say, hold any strategy lightly. You've got to have some strategy, but it may well be in the heat of the battle, things change. In 6 months, they may change. Nokia, remember, there was a funny advert about a tailor and somebody going to have some new trousers made. And they said, of course, so you want big pockets. And there's these massive comedy pockets for their mobile phone. The idea being the phone you really want is a Nokia, a nice and tiny one. It'll slip into your back pocket, might even tiny pocket you somehow got in your jeans. Go there. The best thing about a phone is being tiny. Is it? Then along comes Apple with the iPhone, which is big, but something else about it attracts us. So the idea again of working with reality whilst also trying to fix budgets and strategy and have some straight lines. Because I experience this with a lot of organizations where they've got a new strategy. And you said set in stone, it's set in PowerPoint. We've got a brilliant thing. We're going to announce it, unveil it. There's a fancy video. Who knows? We might even get an Olympic star or pop star to come and do the launch meeting at some massive venue. Bang, the CEO comes up and they've learned their lines. They're doing a Steve Jobs thing. There's lots of pump, pump, pump music. 3 years later, they invite me back. I say, what about Mr. X or Ms. Y? Oh, yes, they've left now. What about that strategy? No, we're not doing that anyway. What about that department that called enterprise and strategy? Oh, well, they're not called that. They're called ES&P or something. Oh, right. But it's basically the same. So what I find is there's a big thing launched, and this may be, to slightly change what I said about something coming from the top. I'm not always sure if it comes from the top or the C-suite or somebody who's very good at branding or whatever. We must have a change. We must have a transformation. Let's unveil this thing. And then as time goes on, things have changed or we've been taken over. So what becomes then the new tablets of stone? And I'm thinking, great, yes. And I'll see you in 3 years' time. We'll see what happens. So that's why I'm always a little concerned when there's something that seems to be all encompassing, this big new shiny change, we must do things differently. My question is always, so what? You're more customer centric. Your strategy is transformational, et cetera, et cetera. What does that mean to me on a Tuesday morning when I'm a bit tired and I want a biscuit and I've got a colleague or customer going, this X, what does that mean? I don't know how to put that into reality. Could you make me understand that? Because I'm trying to make sure that I don't spend too much and make sure she's got what she wants. There, that's what I do. So yes, let's not have big, shiny shibboleths of things. Oh, this is the new thing. We must obey this. Let's make it adaptable. On the other hand, you've got to do something if you're the boss. What is your job if not announcing new things or leading on the white horse? This picture of leader as military character at the front, beating the enemy or whatever. Everything's a nuance. It's a bit organized. It's a bit disorganized. Sufficient disorganization means we can be adaptive. No organization means we feel at sea and we want to go somewhere else.
Riffing off that a little bit, what I really enjoyed about your book was it was giving people permission to challenge things. And I thought it was very interesting. Meetings would be the best example. I'm not sure those were fit for purpose pre the pandemic. We drag people to a room for an hour, as you point out, listen to some lectures, and then have a discussion about it. Well, why don't we let people read the stuff on their own and in their own time and think about it, as opposed to sort of being bounced into things and actually most decisions in meetings are taken outside the room anyway. And so we have these processes. And what I liked is you went through and more or less giving people permission to challenge and think about, well, is that the most effective way? Back to one of the core things I look at, which is how do we get the best out of people? And we don't by putting them through structures that plainly aren't fit for purpose. And the thing I think is terrible is that we often all know it. We're all sat there going through this training is rubbish or this meeting is pointless. And yet we end up in these Groundhog Day scenarios where we just do the same thing again. And so I like the fact that you were saying, well, let's just question whether that makes sense. And if it does, implicitly, if it does, keep it. But let's be open to the fact that the way we've always done things might not be the best way to do things.
Yeah. And I challenge my reader. It's very comfortable to be in a meeting saying this meeting's rubbish. I can't wait to tell my friend Jessica how rubbish it was, how Christian was going on and on as usual. And I have a great time slagging off everyone. I'm saying, come on, if you're in a meeting, you have a responsibility to somehow say, is this the best use of our time? In the meeting, saying the boss is rubbish or she's an idiot isn't particularly helpful. But can we find ways, small experiments to say, could we try it differently? Does the boss have to lead the meeting? Could we have a shorter meeting? Could it be not a meeting, but a series of emails? Could it be just a phone call between X and Y? Could I just come for the first bit of the meeting because that concerns me and then I'll go? Could I have an agenda? Just things like, and in the book, I steal lots of research from people. I acknowledge whose it is, but people who've tried to institute some simple things about, should it be a meeting X? How's the best way to get what we want out of the meeting? Should we try no meeting Friday morning? Something like that. Lots of questioning because we do it always. Should we carry on? But also it's very, very comfortable to be sitting there mentally slagging off everyone else, isn't it? And I do say, and this is where earlier on I went on and on about some nonsense about systems being in the system, but also affecting the system. I found this word autopoiesis, which I think is like onomatopoeia. It's a Greek word, poia, sort of system-y thing, which is, I work for a company. I am happy to say it is rubbish. And that's what it does all the time. No, I'm working for it. I'm part of it. So I'm being affected by the way it is, but I'm also affecting it, even in a small way. I mean, basically, the butterfly flaps its wings and somebody a million miles away coughs, or whatever, chaos theory. There is a system here, and I'm part of the system being affected by the system. I very quickly learned the acronyms, but I'm not saying get rid of all meetings. I'm saying challenge. Is the meeting or the meeting culture creating the impact you want? And if you have the leadership position, you've got to start thinking about that, but also be open to others who might challenge it. Be open to the fact that somebody might be just destructive or not like meetings. So, I did even challenge, should there be somebody, a chief collaboration officer? One of my chapters is called collaboration. Are we collaborating in the right way? I.e., are we actually collaborating? Because everyone, collaboration good. Turns out not always. Some things are better done on your own, or some things are better done, have a go at it, then talk to somebody, then come back and do it on your own. So different ways. What's the right way of collaborating? Because most people say, we got to collaborate. Oh, right, let's have more meetings. And that's it. Yeah, we've got to collaborate. No, not necessarily. A meeting is a forum for collaboration, but often it's a forum for showing off and getting frustrated. So do we have, if we could have somebody whose job it is to make sure we're not wasting time in meetings, but also if X could have talked to Y earlier on, then we would have actually got things done better, more efficiently, or not done the thing that turned out to be bad. I don't see why we can't have that. It tends to happen in small organizations, doesn't it? As soon as an organization becomes big, it tends to lose some of their stuff. But Amazon, for example, I read that they have meetings where people read quietly somebody's ideas and then talk about it. Seems like not a bad idea, or things have been said to them in advance, rather than the meeting being the first time they've had a chance to think about it, because some people need to reflect and so forth. But a lovely stat I found is new managers in their first year have 29% more meetings than more experienced hands. Because you think, I'm a leader now, I better do meetings, because that's when leading happens. When I'm in charge of people, demonstrably so, running a meeting. And then 29% is quite a large number. And then after you realize, actually, maybe the forum for leading isn't the meeting. And there's another one I quote, which is maker's schedule versus manager's schedule. If I'm a manager, my job is to make sure people are doing stuff. So I better have meetings to make sure everything's happening. If I'm a maker, this was a software developer, but I'm writing a proposal, I'm thinking of an idea, I'm putting together some things. Having a meeting actually is in my head all day. There's a meeting coming up at 3:00 or 11. And it's hanging over me.
I mean, it's living rent free in your head all day. You're right. You're absolutely right.
And you're thinking, well, oh gosh, I want to have a good time where I spend the whole morning going at this thing, where I have a chance to improvise with myself, which is to go up some blind alleys, try some stuff, go for a walk, stop for a cup of tea, take the dog for a walk, say hello to my neighbor, or just go for a bath. Winston Churchill regularly had baths, 2 a day. Aaron Sorkin had any number of baths. He wrote West Wing. Baths. Have a bath. It's a great way of getting out of part of your logical brain, which is, I've got to think of a better thing than that, rather than going, oh, is the thing even what I should be thinking about? So that's what I'm trying to get people to think about. Is the meeting the right forum? Definitely is for some stuff. Definitely when I've got to announce. Definitely when I want to talk about celebrate. Definitely when we want to talk about things that everyone needs to know a bit about. But actually, that's why I love Agile, for example, the scrum in the morning, 15 minutes tends to be stand-up. I think it's called a stand-up. So 15 minutes, what are you up to? Good. Okay, off you go, sort of thing. And again, the tyranny of whatever outlook or system you're looking at defaults to half an hour or an hour. Meetings could be 15 minutes, could be 20 minutes, could be 45. Or joy, we finished it. Let's finish the meeting. So just that sense of, can we have some structures, but play with them? That Monday morning meeting, the Christian Hunt meeting. Oh no, it's not. It's going to be that meeting. Okay. And we all hate it. We all loathe it. We come out of it, go and have a cup of coffee or a cigarette with our friends saying, yeah, it was bad as usual. And I don't want people to forget the fact how comfortable that is. I have such a great time slagging off that regular meeting. And that's a really cozy place to be, and acknowledge it's cozy. So if you are talking about it in that way, what are you doing to keep the stasis, the inertia? You're part of that process. You can't just blame Christian Hunt. You've got to start thinking, actually, I'm part of this. I'm enabling. What's my intervention going to be?
You've clearly been to some of my meetings. I mean, I wouldn't hold them on a Monday because that's too stereotypical. Have the middle of the week, but nonetheless, the dynamics you've described, absolutely. What I find fascinating is that these are skills that we don't tend to teach people. So if I think back, and I know times have changed and shock horror, I've got older, but we teach people things like time management and working with respect and a kind of very patronizing basic thing. Or I'm reminded of that scene in the original Office where Gareth is teaching the student intern how to pick up boxes. Those sort of ludic performative training. So we did that. And a lot of the things that you're talking about, I think it's great for you, right? Because it's a business and a book writing opportunity. So let's not knock it, but let's recognize that. Wouldn't it be good if this stuff was actually part of the basic curriculum? And it doesn't seem to feature. We don't think to teach people, I guess in the loosest sense, critical thinking or challenging or anything else. We kind of want it, or we say we want it, as with it all. This is an we thrive on challenge in this organization type statements, but we're not giving people the basic building blocks, which I guess is partly what you're driving at with the book, is to think about some of these things would be useful. My contention would be better if we were equipping people with that on day one of their careers, or even in the education system.
In school, yes. So I do talk about oracy, as in oral, how we talk about literacy. But are we training young people to be able to speak in a meeting, to speak up and say, I don't agree, to express themselves? And so I work a lot with people who said, I was fine in the one-to-one, but then I was asked to talk to the regional managers or the board. And I went, can't do that. So how do we get people to both informally make friends across org charts, different departments, which is all about alliances, which is all about saying hello in the coffee queue and stuff. And as well, as critical thinking, be able to express themselves and feel confident physically to say, this needs changing, or this is the idea I've had. And we worry when children can't read. We just assume they're good at listening, because that's what teaching is. So you listen to the teacher. We just assume they can express themselves. And this is in the ether at the moment. There are some schools based on oracy, because so much of what we do, the job interview, the meeting, the conversation, the snatched word in the elevator is based on, can I express myself orally? I think it should be part of school. I noticed that my daughter is going to do a STEM subject at university, and there are some modules which are about this. You may be very clever at the STEM subject, maths, physics, engineering, whatever, but can you express yourself when you've got to sell the idea or create collaborative environments? And it does need to be taught. And even more so, I say, this is the thing. How does a manager learn how to make a collaborative team? That's a tough one, because I can teach people some improv skills, yes, and so they can be collaborators, better at working with others. But how does a manager corral that and curate that? And I think she or he has to role model it, role modeling working with other people, not slagging off other departments, admitting vulnerability. Somebody's got a great idea. Great, let's run with that rather than my idea. And stepping in when an idea doesn't seem to work and say, okay, let's leave that. Something about role modeling collaboration. And so I think we do need to train people. This is not intuitive. We do know that children learn by copying. My son learned the Suzuki piano, which is all based on listening, playing, eventually without the sheet music. And Dr. Suzuki, who created this method, said, isn't it amazing that all the children in Nagoya, Japan, somehow learn how to speak Japanese and somehow have a Nagoya accent? And it's because we learn by imitating. So can we role model this? Because having children, they often have to do group projects in class, and the teacher, or out of class as well, hasn't told them how to do that. So it often ends up, and I have to admit this, with the parent doing it. There's 5 children, set a project. They don't have the guide rails. Well, do we start with an idea? What's stage 1? What's stage 2? Or there's one person who just takes it on, they do it themselves, and they get fed up with the other 4 or 3 or whatever, or the parent steps in and does it. So we need to be able to learn how to do group work, to encourage those who are not natural group workers, to allow those who prefer that way to do their thing, but report back to be in the team. Those who just want to talk all the time, how do we make them feel part of the deal? How do we teach people the vital skill, which is in any organization, after a while, if you understand the technical stuff, tends to be how to get on with people. My wife, who is brilliant, as you would imagine, she unwittingly came up with something that I am now going to share. It could be my next book, but it's a page really. She said 3 things, and I made an acronym: GAP, G, can you get on with people? A, can you analyze stuff? P, can you present your analysis? And that's kind of it, really. So there's a bit of left brain, a bit of right brain, because analysis isn't just looking at spreadsheets. It's kind of looking at the story behind and yada, yada, etc. Getting on with people, because you need to get on with people to get the information from them, for them to share their contacts or their spreadsheets or their real insights that can't be expressed in 2 dimensions. And then can you present this in such a way as, what's the audience? What do I want them to do with this stuff? So that seemed to me that actually most of our education might do A for analysis. So in history now, people are understanding how to verify sources, or say, well, this was written later, but the regime under which it was written was X or Y. So it's looking at sources carefully, looking at data. How was this found? This was a sample of 12 people, 3 of whom answered the questions. That's not very strong data. Or it was 1 million people over 30 years. Okay, that's a different kind of data. So I guess what I'm saying is encourage the technical ability. Anybody, even in the most technical job, will have to talk to somebody else to explain what they're doing or check in that what they're going to do is the right thing. And it's not easily taught, A, to collaborate, but B, harder to encourage collaboration and curate that thing, because that thing which is people talking. People say, people are our greatest asset. No, they're not. It's the conversations they're having with each other and with our clients and with our suppliers that is your greatest asset. And people leave. What happens to those relationships, those conversations, those memories, those feelings that could be a strong part of where your organization is powerful or not?
I love that. I think that's great. And there's definitely something in that, because I think I'm worried when I hear about, well, we need to promote maths. Everybody needs to be doing maths all the time. And I get financial literacy makes sense. But when I hear that, I worry that we're missing some of the other things. And I think your emphasis on oracy, I think it's such a powerful skill when you have it. And you can, you come across situations when people don't, and it is very debilitating. And I think not being able to speak and express yourself and build those relationships, that must impede you in life. So I love the emphasis that you've placed on it. As I speak as someone, you've had a privileged education, I've had one. I think one sort of takes it, it's in the toolkit. And I think recognizing that not everybody has that, I think is very, very powerful, because that leads to exclusion. And that's not a great opposite. And speaking of exclusion and thinking about people's reactions to things, what you're talking about is a very open-minded approach to the world. I could see lots of people with a vested interest, or indeed a lack of interest in promoting the ideas that you're talking about. I presume you come across them. And if so, how do you manage that?
Well, they tend to be scared of improv because they think it's just go crazy, spontaneous, swear, do naughty things, have no structure. And I say, whoa. I'm saying let's have structure where we need it, and let's have improv when we need it. If you really want creativity, you've got to define what creativity is. And it may just be something as simple as, let's put the coffee machine there, or let's have a nicer coffee machine on the 12th floor, not just the boss's floor. Let's allow people to work flexibly. Let's allow her to work flexibly. Let's allow him, who wants to come to the office every day, to do that. So creativity with a small c. People are scared of what I do. They might think that what I'm saying is, let's do jokes, let's be spontaneous, let's have no script. And it's that thing of minimal structure, maximum autonomy. How much is the structure allowing for things to move forward, and how much is it not? It's not no structure. And that's why I emphasize that the Comedy Store players have this structure, but you also have meta structures, which is yes, and yes, what you say, I accept and I build on it. I'm always listening. I treat what you say as offers. That's kind of meta structures, if you like, a way of being. And in fact, Pixar talk about plussing. You can't criticize an idea unless you have a constructive way of moving it forward. So people don't feel, they're critiquing the idea, they don't like me. They're critiquing my idea, but moving it forward. Plussing, it's yes and. So that's what people like. That's what people who employ me want. Sometimes they have to persuade their boss or their HR partner that it's safe. And I say, I don't get return business. I wouldn't have done it for 25 years.
If completely renegade.
If it was, but they want a bit of renegade. And for some people, they come and this is going to be outside my comfort zone. They say, well, what does that mean? You improvise all the time. That you kind of having a chat with this person, but are you improvising to good effect, or are you just waffling? Are you just going down a plug hole of saying the same things you always say, or too often people are just sticking to a script. Somebody says, "This is what I think. This is what I think." Then their colleague says, "Well, this is what I think. This is what I think," and they go away thinking, "Well, now I know what I think." And improv is all about, oh, I can be adaptive, I can challenge, I can be changed by what I hear. I can be altered. My character grows in the moment of conversation. So yes, I do have to persuade them, but generally I'm not running a huge business. And they come to me knowing I can bring a something that will be outside, shall we say, some conventional training, but I'm saying it should be there all the time because profit drives business, engagement drives the public sector. We need to be creative. We need to be thinking about A, how do we get the best people? B, how do we retain them? C, how do we make sure people who want to buy our stuff want to buy it and that it's the thing they want to buy? And you can say that about many sectors. So I'm right in there. I'm talking about, are you listening to your customer? I'm right in there. Are you listening to the new people? How do you find the new people? I loved, for example, yesterday I went to a festival, the Soho Media Festival, and they were just talking about recruitment. How do we find people who don't just look like me, how do we find neurodivergent people who have amazing skills, but aren't necessarily great in the conventional process for applying for a job? So why not have, for example, send a video? Do you have to fill in a form with your CV? The interview for people who find those boards, they call them boards at BBC, confrontational, find other ways of having conversations. Just things like that. Is how do we find the people who could bring skills to us? Are we just looking in the same way? So just those, I'm saying, let's find small experiments that are sufficiently risk assessed, that allow for what we actually want to find. If you want to be creative, then find where people are being creative. If you want to be creative, what is creativity? And all those transferable skills that don't necessarily come from conventional educations, find them. On the other hand, I did a session for a huge management consultancy the other day. There was hardly anybody who looked like me, because they know that diversity of thought and in other areas as well brings creativity, as long as those skills and those opinions are being used well. So there's a challenge of leadership here, both to find those people and to bring them on, so they don't think, oh, this is quite what I want to do, I'll go somewhere else. So yeah, it is a challenge sometimes, but mostly I've got warm contacts. I know my patter. I know how to say yes, improv, yes, creativity, yes, collaboration, yes, teamwork, yes, thinking outside the box. Also, respecting structure, listening. Nobody would say listening is something we don't want. And that's, we'll no more listening. Listening is what improv is about. It's listening to what you said and trying to co-create with you, accepting what you said as an offer, a gift, something to build on, rather than disrupting my script that I have to write on my own.
Fantastic. What a great way to finish. Now, you've been doing it throughout the episode, but I know you're going to do even more fantastic at the end. Remind people what the book is called. Tell them about the comedy. So anything else you want to promote, Neil, go for it.
My book is called In the Moment, published by Kogan Page, available throughout the world. Now, In the Moment, Kogan Page. My name is Neil Mullarkey. I'm sure Christian will put that somewhere. It's very hard to spell. Neil Mullarkey, but think of mull it over. Lark, rise with the lark about. Key to unlock potential. Lark, key. And every Sunday I perform with the Comedy Store Players. Comedy Store Players, every Sunday we do improv. Come along, give us suggestions, and we'll create theatre before your very eyes.
And your website is?
neilmullarkey.com. You can also look at Improv Your Biz, as in improv, improve, or improvise. Improv Your Biz, and your is the whole pronoun, not you are, which is just wrong. Improv Your Biz, B-I-Z.
Amazing. Links, as you rightly pointed out, Neil, will be in the show notes to all of those things for people that were caught with the lyrical delivery that you managed and didn't have a pen quite to hand. They can find all those things in the show notes. But as they will have detected from the conversation we've had. You've got some fascinating ideas. I think you expressed them wonderfully. The book is filled with practical skills, lots of case studies in there. It's unsurprisingly a cracking read, so comes highly recommended, as does chatting to you. And I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Neil for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Neil, his book In the Moment, the Comedy Store Players, and all the other things that he does, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. You'll also find a link to my new book, Humanizing Rules, Bringing Behavioral Science to Ethics and Compliance, and you can read the first few chapters of that for free by following the link that's also in the show notes. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you liked this episode, then you might also enjoy listening to an episode featuring comedy writer Paul Dornan. There's a link to that in the show notes as well. I'll be back with another episode of this show very soon. But in the meantime, stay safe, remember to be in the moment, and thank you so much for listening.